and I want to discuss three of those, to my thinking, the three major areas of contrived or fabricated disagreement about the Israel-Palestine conflict. Those kinds of disagreement, the aim and purpose of which is simply to divert attention from the real issues or to simply sow confusion about what are the real issues. One form of this fabricated disagreement is the effort to mystify the conflict, to envelop it in this ideological cloud and to pretend that it simply can't be understood unless you have some grasp or the equivalent grasp of rocket science or particle physics. That this is a very difficult conflict to understand. It goes back, you usually hear things like it goes back to biblical enmities, ancient hatreds, or more recently, clashes of religion, clashes of civilization, that it can't be compared to any other conflict. The fancy word is, the conflict, they use the Latin expression, it's sui generis, it can't be compared, or in the language we're more accustomed to, it's unique. Like the Nazi Holocaust is unique, and the Jewish people are unique, and the Jewish nation is unique. Anything involving the Jews is always unique. You can't compare. And so the Israel-Palestine conflict involves Jews, so you can't compare. It's unique. Well, the fact of the matter is, I don't think it's particularly complicated at all. And if people make the most ordinary sorts of analogies with reasonably comparable situations, it's perfectly clear what happened and what's happening now. Not difficult at all. Let's take the question of resistance. What accounts for the resistance of the Palestinians to, or the resistance over the last 100 years to the Zionist and later the Israeli enterprise? Well, I was kind of surprised when I opened Benny Morris's book, his bigger volume called Righteous Victims. I'm reading the book, and at some point he writes, early on in the book, he writes as follows: "The fear of territorial dispossession and displacement was to be the chief motor of Arab antagonism to Zionism. The fear of territorial dispossession and displacement was to be the chief motor of Arab antagonism to Zionism." Now, some of you are wondering, well, what's such a big deal about that sentence? I could have written it. Yeah, it doesn't look particularly brilliant, profound, and yet, when I read it, the words kind of leapt off the page for me. Why did they leap off the page? Well, notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say it was anti-Semitism that was the chief motor of Arab antagonism to Zionism. He doesn't say it's hatred of Jews or hatred of European civilization or all of those other commonplaces we hear nowadays. His explanation is perfectly straightforward and perfectly uncomplicated, simple. They resisted Zionism because they feared, as it turned out, rightfully so, that if the Zionist movement succeeded in reaching and achieving its objectives, it would be at the expense of the indigenous population, that the indigenous population would be dispossessed and displaced. Not very complicated, perfectly analogous to what happened in North America. Let's take an obvious example. Let's say somebody's writing a history book on Native American resistance to Euro-American encroachment. And the resistance was very bloody. You shouldn't kid ourselves about that. The Native Americans, they killed men, women, children, infants. It was brutal. No question about that. We don't want to be politically correct. It was very brutal. It was brutal on the Euro-American side also, but we shouldn't be blinded to the fact it was also very brutal on the, what you call first, what is the expression used, first peoples. It was very brutal on the Native American side. Someone like the president and also historian Theodore Roosevelt, he writes in his book, it was a multi-volume history, The Winning of the West, he said sometimes, the frontiersmen, they descended to the levels of savagery of the Native Americans. Yeah, well, it was more than sometimes. It was most of the time. But it was savage in all sides, and we shouldn't kid ourselves about that. Okay, it was brutal. But how would we react if we opened up a history book and a historian tried to explain the Native American resistance, often brutal, by saying that they were motivated by anti-Europeanism or anti-whiteism or anti-Christianism? Well, you would laugh. You don't need to conjure up profound cosmic explanations about why the Native Americans resisted. The answer is right there. It's staring you in the face. They resisted because they understood that they would, if the Euro-American enterprise succeeded, it would result in their, to now use Benny Morris's terms, their territorial displacement and dispossession. Not very complicated, I don't think.